Hi, my name is Corey Biazzo, and I'm a practicing American civil litigation attorney, and you are watching Executive Coup. In today's episode, we're going to briefly discuss some of the highlights from the U.S. Supreme Court's oral arguments on the narrow technical issue from the case against President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship that we discussed in episode 2. To recap, while the merits stage of the case has not yet been heard, where the constitutionality of the executive order would be ruled upon, yesterday's arguments on May 15, 2025 regarded the Trump administration's challenge to the ability of federal courts to issue nationwide injunctions. Injunctions are court orders forbidding a party from doing something. In this case, for example, 3 separate federal district courts have issued nationwide injunctions preventing the implementation of President Trump's executive order number 14160, titled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. The injunctions exist because the executive order directs federal government agencies to not recognize birth certificates and other state and local government-issued documentation as proof of U.S. citizenship for children born in the United States who do not have at least one parent who is either a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent U.S. resident. To recap, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states in part, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. The Supreme Court has previously ruled that the 14th Amendment applies to anyone born within the physical jurisdiction of the United States or within the physical United States. I'm going to recap some notable quotes from some of the Supreme Court justices during the hearing. After discussing the Trump administration's suggestion that injunctions should only apply to individual litigants who sue to challenge the executive order and should not apply nationwide, despite the apparent illegality of the executive order because it contradicts the 14th Amendment and long-standing Supreme Court precedent, Justice Kagan stated, quote, "And for 4 years they're going to be like an untold number of people who, according to all the law that this court has ever made, ought to be citizens who are not being treated as such." In another instance during the arguments, Justice Kagan stated to the U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer, who was arguing on behalf of the Trump administration, "Let's just assume that you are dead wrong. How do we get to that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long does it take? How do we get the result that there is a single rule of citizenship that is the rule that we have historically applied rather than the rule that the EO would have us do?" Justice Barrett asked the following questions regarding the administration's possible failure to obey circuit appellate court orders. You resisted Justice Kagan when she asked you whether the government would obey within the Second Circuit a precedent. Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion? John Sauer replied, "Our general practice is to respect those precedents, but there are circumstances when it is not a categorical practice, and that is not." Justice Barrett cut off Sauer and asked, Is that this administration's practice or the long-standing practice of the federal government?" Sauer replied, "As I understand, it's long-standing practice of the Department of Justice." Justice Barrett replied, "Really?" Justice Barrett stated, "I'm talking about in this kind of situation. I'm talking about this week. The Second Circuit holds that the executive order is unconstitutional, and then what do you do the next day or the next week?" John Sauer replied, "Generally, we follow it." Justice Barrett replied, "So you're still saying generally?" To which John Sauer said, "Yes." Justice Barrett went on, "So you still think that it's generally the long-standing policy of the federal government to take that approach?" Sauer replied, "That is my understanding." Justice Jackson stated at one point, "The real concern, I think, is that your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime from the standpoint of the executive. where everybody has to have a lawyer and file a lawsuit in order for the government to stop violating people's rights. Justice Kagan said, let's assume for the purpose of this that you're wrong about the merits, that the government is not allowed to do this under the Constitution, and yet it seems to me that your argument says we get to keep on doing it until everyone who is potentially harmed by it figures out how to file a lawsuit and hire a lawyer, etc. I don't understand how that is remotely consistent with the rule of law. Justice Sotomayor stated, so far as I see it, this order violates 4 Supreme Court precedents. In my opinion, based on what I heard today, I believe the Supreme Court may issue some limiting guidelines to the lower federal courts that limit their use of nationwide injunctions. I don't believe they will be removed from the judicial toolbox entirely, though. I think this is a terrible case for the administration to try to have nationwide injunctions removed entirely. I believe that the majority of the court will find the use of nationwide injunctions appropriate in this matter. I also think ultimately the majority of the court will block President Trump from implementing his executive order that clearly violates the 14th Amendment and Supreme Court precedent of this issue, and additionally a congressional statute that codified the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court should issue its ruling in the next month. Keep following Executive Coup for further updates on this matter and others related to the apparent executive coup attempt that is unfolding in the U.S. federal government at the direction of President Donald J. Trump. Thank you.